Hold on.
Hold
Let
up.
me get a cough out. Hey, it's Sue.
And Megan,
The
the
Spine
Spine Breakers.
And today we are doing our 2018 Read Harder Challenge wrap-up.
Wrap-up. Yes. And we are drinking some tea.
Because I have been sick. I'm still sick. I have pneumonia.
Pneumonia.
So, no booze for me, because I'm on antibiotics.
Yes. So we are drinking hot tea because that is the beverage of choice when you're ill.
Yeah.
In my mind.
We're going to go through each of the 24 challenges and just say what we read for that challenge and what rating we gave it out of 5 stars.
Yes. I will say I did not complete the Read Harder Challenge. I missed it by 2 challenges this year because I got real slumpy toward the end of the year. So.
And I did complete the Read Harder Challenge. I've completed it every year so far that I've done it.
God, you're such an overachiever.
Let's get into it.
Okay.
So the first challenge is to read a book published posthumously.
And to my knowledge, I did not complete this challenge.
And I read The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien, and I gave it 4 stars.
The second challenge was to read a book of true crime.
And I read Killers of the Flower Moon by David Grann and gave it 4 stars.
And I read In Cold Blood by Truman Capote, and I gave it 3 stars.
And the next challenge is to read a classic of genre fiction.
And for this, I read The Giver, and I gave it 4 stars.
And I read Foundation by Isaac Asimov and gave it 4 stars.
The next challenge is to read a comic written and illustrated by the same person.
And I read The Poet and the Flea by G.E. Gallus and gave it 4 stars.
And I did not complete this challenge.
The next challenge is to read a book set in or about one of the 5 BRICS countries, which are Brazil, Russia, India, China, or South Africa.
And I read Waiting by Ha Jin, which was set in China, and I gave it 2 stars and did not care for it.
And I read Heart of a Dog by Mikhail Bulgakov, which is set in Russia, and I gave it 4 stars.
The next challenge is to read a book about nature.
And I read Nature's Nether Regions.
Yeah, you did.
By Minnow Schulfrusen. No idea how to say the name. And it was pretty interesting. I gave it 4 stars.
And I read The Song of the Forest by Colin McKay, and I gave it like 4.5 stars.
And the next challenge is to read a Western.
I read Coal Black Horse by Robert Olmsted and gave it 4 stars.
And I read Woe to Live On by Daniel Woodrell and gave it 4 stars.
The next challenge is to read a comic written or illustrated by a person of color, and we both read the same book for this challenge.
Which was Kindred, a graphic novel adaptation by John...
And Octavia.
Yeah.
And
source material by
yeah.
Octavia Butler. It was adapted by Damian Duffy and John Jennings.
Nice.
And I gave it 4.5 stars.
And I think I gave it 4 stars. Yes.
The next challenge is to read a book of colonial or post-colonial literature.
And I read Wild Seed by Queen Octavia Butler, and I gave it 4 stars.
And I read The Last of the Mohicans by James Fenimore Cooper, and I gave it 2 stars.
Womp.
I did not care for it.
Do not care for it. And the next challenge is to read a romance, a romance novel by or about a person of color.
I read Like Water for Chocolate by Laura Esquivel, and I gave it 4 stars, but that's higher than I thought I rated it. I think it would be more like a 3 or a 3.5, TBH.
TB. And I read Haven by Rebecca Weatherspoon, and I didn't actually rate it because I wasn't sure how to rate it because it was a romance novel, but I felt like it was a fairly decent one, so 3 or 4 stars, I don't know, somewhere in there.
I don't know. The next challenge was to read a children's classic. Turned into Sean Connery there.
We'll get there.
The next challenge was to read a children's classic published before 1980.
And I read The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett, whose name, for some reason, I always stumble over.
It's hard to say.
Ugh, and I gave it 4 stars.
And I read A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett and gave it 4 stars.
The next challenge was to read a celebrity memoir.
And I read Not My Father's Son by Alan Cumming and gave it 4 stars.
And I read Born a Crime by Trevor Noah and gave it 4 stars, which I think would probably be more like 4.5 stars because I really loved it.
Next challenge was to read an Oprah Book Club selection.
And I read White Oleander by Janet Fitch and gave it 5 stars.
And I read The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison and gave it 4 stars.
The next challenge was to read a book of social science.
And I read White Trash by Nancy Eisenberg and gave it 4 stars.
And I read I Am Not a Slut by Leora Tannenbaum and gave it 3 stars because I was very disappointed in a couple parts of it. Miss Tannenbaum.
Miss Tannenbaum. The next challenge was to read a one-sitting book.
And I read The Wicked and the Divine, Volume 1, and gave it 4 stars.
And I read Fortune Box by Madeline Swan and gave it 5 stars.
Next is the first book in a new to you YA or middle grade series.
And I read Skullduggery Pleasant by Derek Landy and gave it 4 stars.
And I read Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children and gave it 4 stars.
The next challenge was to read a sci-fi novel with a female protagonist by a female author.
And I read Mind of My Mind by Octavia Butler and I gave it 4 stars.
And I read A Closed and Common Orbit by Becky Chambers and gave it 4 stars.
Next was to read a comic that isn't published by Marvel, DC, or Image.
And I read Charlie, Issue 2, and by Finus Massey, Chris Burgess, and Christopher Harris. I gave it 3 stars.
And I read Vault. It's like John Carpenter's Tales of Science Fiction, and this one was called Vault, and it was like 3, I think it was like a 3 comic series, and I gave it 3 stars because it was okay.
The next challenge was to read a book of genre fiction in translation.
So I read Hex by Thomas Olt Huvelt and translated by Nancy Forrest Flyer. This is a Dutch novel, and it was good. I gave it 4 stars.
And I read The Deep Sea Diver Syndrome by Serge Brussolo. I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, it was translated by Edward Gauvin. From the French. And I gave it 2 stars. It was not very good.
Did not care for it.
Did not care for it.
Next is to read a book with a cover you hate.
And I read The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald and gave it 4 stars.
And I read Autumn, the City, and again, don't recall the author.
Like David Moody.
It is David Moody, you're right.
How do I remember the author?
That is an excellent question. By David Moody, and the cover is really stupid. I wish I could show it to you.
I'll put a picture up.
Real dumb. But I gave it 3 stars. It was pretty much just your average zombie novel. Nothing special.
Next was to read a mystery by a person of color or LGBTQ plus author.
And I read Long Black Veil by Jennifer Finney Boylan, and I actually really liked it and gave it 4 stars. I was surprised because I don't usually like mystery novels.
And I read Wife of the Gods by Quay Corte, and I too was very surprised that I really enjoyed it, and I also gave mine 4 stars.
Yes. Next is an essay anthology.
I read Selfish, Shallow, and Self-Absorbed, which was 16, I think the subtitle was like 16 writers on their decision not to have kids. And it was edited by Megan Daum. And I gave it 4.5 stars.
Daum, girl.
Daum.
And I read Not That Bad, Dispatches from Rape Culture, which was a collection of essays about rape culture, and it was put together, edited by Roxane Gay, and I gave it 4 stars.
And the next challenge was to read a book with a female protagonist over the age of 60.
And we both read the same book for this challenge, which is The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid.
And I gave it 4.5 stars.
And I gave it 5 stars. I loved it. And lastly is to read an assigned book you hated or never finished.
And I read Sin and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance by Robert M. Pirsig. and still hated it. I gave it 2 stars. I don't know why I was like not handing out 1 stars this year. I didn't give any books 1 star.
1 star readings.
I feel like I didn't read a book that was like truly had no redeemable qualities.
Truly detestable. You know? Yeah. I feel the same way because I don't think I had any 1 stars either. But yeah. I read
some bad ones that I really didn't like.
But they had redeemable qualities.
Right.
Yeah. So no, I read The Grooves of Wrath by John Steinbeck, and I gave it 3 stars. Still did not care for it, but again, like I do feel like it captures an important moment in American history, even though, Jesus Christ, it was tedious to read. So,
all right.
Thanks, Steinbeck.
That's how we did in the Read Harder Challenge. If you participated in it, let us know how you did.
How'd y'all do? Thanks for watching.
Yeah.
We'll see you next time. Rusty.
Sorry. I was thinking I was going to say something else, and I was like, I don't know.
Back it.
Yeah. Bye.
Adios.